Hello everyone, I'm happy to be here. I've been here a couple of times actually, and my longest time was when I was here as a visiting scholar at the Sustainable Places Institute a couple of years ago. Today I will hope be a little bit briefer, but I wanted to draw on some experiences that I've had over a long period of years, 25 or so, on both specific interdisciplinary research projects relating to sustainable development, implementation, policy integration for sustainability, sustainable development in the Swedish mountain region with natural scientists and social scientists, a myriad of disciplines, some, well, in the beginning 40 people and then 20 people over 8 years. And then also from my role when I was Deputy Director in Stockholm Environment Institute, which is a truly interdisciplinary institute. When I arrived there some 15 years ago, it was a lot of natural scientists and geographers, and then over the years I've discovered that now there is a lot more social scientists in the institute, and similarly I was part of the build-up of the Stockholm Resilience Center, and we had a similar situation there. So I will be speaking as a social scientist, as a political scientist, from my experience with working with a lot of other disciplines, notably natural science, but also some engineers and so on. So this is the background of my talk. I think everybody in this room is already into this thinking that disciplinary and multidisciplinary research are both needed. They stimulate each other. We need deep disciplinary knowledge as well as working together interdisciplinary. But my experience is that creating true interdisciplinarity is quite a challenge, and this is what I will draw some lessons from. I think that the issue areas that Sustainable Places Institute is engaged in is a truly interdisciplinary endeavor. Because you are looking at particular problems, as we have heard with the first two speakers, that are indeed interdisciplinary in character and even transdisciplinary in the sense that they also require society at large to, or particular stakeholders to be engaged as well. But of course, these are not the same multidisciplinary than you working more, in different fields perhaps, and interdisciplinary is supposed to integrate those thinking, and transdisciplinary also get the practitioners on board. However, I've found that in reality, you can read about, what is the difference, but in reality, when you're working with interdisciplinary research on sustainable development, it's often they sort of go together, these things, in reality. And even in disciplinary research can be an ingredient that is also really important. So where could we meet? In practice, I think defining the agenda, finding the problems that we want to resolve, but we can also meet in terms of the approaches, the methods that we have had some examples of that already. And this can be surveys, it can be rapid appraisal, but it will also be case studies and systems analysis, etc. The writing process is of course important, where you can actually put your brains together and do joint analysis of a collective data gathering, a critical review of each other's work, and publishing, of course, joint compilation of things like you've done with this massive books about different perspectives, but you can also write truly together. And I think that is that is even more of a challenge, especially if you are very many people, then you need to know each other really well. But I think communication and outreach is also a way to get together, and I'll come back to that, I think. But this also requires, of course, special skills, and researchers are not always so good at it. A common problem I already talked about, but we have to also think about that even though we might think that we are talking about the same problem, if you start deliberating and going deeper into it, you will find, if you come from different disciplinary perspectives, that you have understood the things very differently. So here it's really important to acknowledge that this is fine. I mean, you can understand it from different angles, and maybe that's actually part of the solution. That's part of the interdisciplinarity, in fact. And in practice, I've found that the different epistemologies that we have from the different research disciplines, and also the cultures that might vary quite a lot, especially if you take the extremes of history or humanities and medicine or engineering, it can be very different and inhibiting, but also enriching. But then you have to listen. You have to take time to listen. Another thing that I've found over the years is that we often talk with similar concept, but they mean very different things. Just take an example, community. If you talk to a plant, an expert in biology, they think of plant communities. In political science, we think about a community, maybe how it's governed. And a sociologist would think different, a historian would think different, etc., etc. So it's important to listen here as well, and not take for granted that everybody has understood this the same way. And another practical example that I had in this Mountain Mister program, we talked about management. And of course, the fish expert, he thought it was about how many fishes you could pull up from the lake and how you can manage that. Whereas we as political scientists, of course, would think of management on a much higher level of how the whole organization is set up, and how the county administration is working with the different stakeholders and so on, and how they together manage the whole system as such. Finally, a thing that is really important, I think, and I think you have discovered that in sustainable places as well, that mutual respect and interest, and you have to have some fun together and have a personal chemistry that works. So a lot of social events can help that. Another thing is that interdisciplinary research requires a lot of time, and plan for that, because it requires, especially if you haven't worked together before, you have to get to know each other. Maybe you should actually have some outings and do things together to get to know each other personally, and build up faith and trust in each other. And I've been in some of these, well, I told you about this sustainable development in the mountains, which was originally 40 people, and many of them were like 10%, 20%, and so on. It was horrible to get all these people. I mean, people would opt out, and they didn't have time to come, and they didn't have time to listen. They were just into their own thing and wanted to deliver, and that doesn't work. So interdisciplinary projects need to be sufficiently staffed, and my experience is that 40% or at least 30% of your time should be devoted, because otherwise there is a danger that all the time will be used for meetings and you can't actually deliver anything, because all this talk takes time. And then, of course, with the junior people, the PhD students and so on, they have to be also planning for their career, so they have to have time for their disciplinary deep knowledge as well, going to courses and so on. This means that you have to be cautious to actually have sufficient number of senior staff who can devote more time and maybe have the PhD students support the process rather than be on top of it, because there is a danger otherwise, at least with our academic cultures and how we get appointments later on, that if there aren't any interdisciplinary units in the university, it might be difficult to continue. And then, of course, leadership for these endeavors and clear responsibilities are really important, even in the smaller groups. The smallest such research project that I was part of was only 5 senior researchers, but even there, leadership was important, because you need, you can't, everybody can't be a leader even if you're at the same level, so to speak. So I've already talked about some of this, that we have the different professional identities and cultures in the disciplines, and that we have different norms and so on. Financing and endurance, I think it's important to have sufficiently long time, unless you are a team who have worked together several times, then you can do a little tag-on project, but if you don't know each other from the start, it takes a lot of time. So the projects and the engagements have to be long enough. And of course, physically, you have to have places to meet. So a difficulty that we had in some of the projects was that, you know, we were in completely different faculties and so on, and then you have to find somewhere where there's a neutral ground, so to speak, to meet. And maybe get away is a way to do that, actually. And going to the mountains is always nice, right? When appropriate, involvement of stakeholders and target groups can be also really rewarding in terms of interdisciplinarity. And in this long-term mountain research, we actually engaged them both in the definition of the problems to be researched, but also along the way we had hearings and engagement from the different stakeholders, from everything from indigenous peoples to business, sustainable tourism and so on, and county administrations, etc. But of course the expectations must be right, and often they are asking for more hands-on, quick information rather than long-term research. So you have to also engage them in the beginning really well and have a continuous dialogue to have the right expectations of what will come out of the research. Of course, with what we had a full-time communicator in the last 2 years of that big research program, that helped a lot, because that person could help both to make this communication much more professional, outward looking, but also get us as researchers to say things in a way that can be understood outside our academic quarters, so to speak. So I think it's really important to have these both coordination and communication functions to be amply funded for it to be working. Just a few, if I have a few minutes left. There are some perceived traps, especially if social scientists are coming into dominating natural science or engineering, or I don't know, I haven't worked with medicine, but probably the same thing there, because the other part, non-social scientists, they often feel superior in a way. There are more citations, they have a different culture of publishing with each other, big groups, etc. And many social scientists, I think these traditions are changing, in fact, but when I started off, I mean, the thing was to write on your own. You know, that was the good thing. You write a book on your own. But the traditions, when you work interdisciplinary, it would be you write just a section or something, and you aren't in control of the whole thing. So it's a completely different thing. And there's also a danger to make social scientists use quantitative methods because it feels more secure, you know, for those who don't understand. So often we are seen as more arbitrary and with simple insights that some natural scientists say that they already knew, but actually they didn't, because they didn't say it before we said it. So, and that's a problem. And it's also a problem that often the social sciences are seen as one discipline, like homogeneous discipline, whereas we have very different approaches within the social sciences, methods and epistemologies. As well, so that is a problem. And we are often expected to resolve policy problems and do more of consultancy work rather than pursue critical research in the eyes of some. So those are traps that we need to be aware of, and to be aware of that we should be in the planning from the onset and not tagged on as an extra, you know, to have some policy orientation at the end. I think it's important to state that even though there is an inclination to see interdisciplinary research as problem-oriented and to solve policy problems, it can also contribute to true theoretical development. But that this, of course, requires a lot of thinking. And also, I mean, I have this about the domination as well here. So you need the incentives for crossing over the natural science and social science divide. You need more ways of rewarding that kind of enterprise. And unfortunately, I don't think our universities is doing that very much, rather the contrary sometimes. So this is something you have to work with in your projects or in your research, bigger research endeavors. I think you recognize my point here, because we'll be discussing today actually in the Sustainable Places Institute discussions that old programmatic or thematics might need to be revisited after some time, that you need to rejuvenate and get inspirations from new developments, but also, of course, over some time you have already come so far. That engaging with decision makers can be really rewarding and stimulating and useful, but maybe not all the time. You have to think about when is the opportunity right, when can we have the right expectations on that kind of interaction, so that they don't become disappointed because you cannot deliver what they really wanted. So long-standing personal networks with stakeholders can be very good, because then you know more about their expectations. In essence, I've listed lots of problems and issues to be dealt with, but I mean, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think it was really rewarding and a lot of fun to be doing interdisciplinary work. And so that's the main message, that it's fun. You should do it because you learn so much more than what you would have done otherwise. So thank you.